In part 2 of the series, we interview Amaranthia, daughter of Claire from episode 24. Amaranthia shares with us about the bullying she faced for being the only person of color in a conservative, all-white school. She talks about how the ostracism left her completely isolated and unsafe in her own home and the effect it had on her mental health. Living with agoraphobia and PTSD and anxiety, Amaranthia discusses how she eventually took inspiration and relief through her artwork, and hence the birth of Sista Creatives Rising.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to be able to add on to my mom's story. It's really exciting. It's a two-parter. So
Yeah.
Never done that before.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'd spoken to the both of you during our pre-call, and I felt like both of you had such unique experiences, but I love how they sort of like really meld well together in a sense as well. We're able to sort of provide one story, but from two different angles. And I feel like this is going to be such a great little addition to, this story in terms of like overall just unpacking everything. And, it was really nice how the previous episode with your mom, Claire, mentioned about how, for example, things like trauma can be passed on. And so that's definitely one of those things I would really love to talk about with you as well. And also like your own personal journey and how also that contributed to sort of like where you are today as well. So can you tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised?
Yeah, so I was born in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I lived there until I think maybe I was 3 years old. So as you would know, like my mom's from Barbados and my he's from Massachusetts. So we just kind of settled there, especially because my mom was going to school at Mount Holyoke College. So yeah, that's kind
Wow.
of where everything started.
Yeah. Um, you were in Massachusetts for 3 years, you said?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So I suppose you probably don't remember too much about, your early formative years. Um, Probably most of your memory would be where you went after. Where is that?
Yeah, actually, right after that is we moved to Manchester, Connecticut. So I just turned 4, and then I could remember that, so and then my parents or my dad, he got the opportunity to be an expat, to go to Japan. So I remember my parents um went there for like I think a week or two. I think it was a week. I stayed with my grandparents and they came back. Everything was set up, and then we went to a hotel. We stayed there for a bit, and then we got sent to Japan. So I remember my experiences in Connecticut, bits and pieces, but most of those early memories are in Japan. And yeah,
Right.
basically.
That's awesome. Japan. I mean, it's so different. I guess there's not very many people I've spoken to originally from the US living in Asia, even for that matter. Um,
Right.
what was that like for you?
Well, I think I went to PAL International School. And so that was preschool. And so I was there until I was like 5, I think. So yeah, I went there for like a year. And then I went and switched to kindergarten, which was another private school. It was Nishimashi International. And so in that setting, both of those settings, it was an international student body. So uh, living in Connecticut before, I was usually the only Black girl in the area. If I went to like playgrounds or play centers and things like that, people wouldn't interact with me just straight up because of racism, because of my hair and how I look. So having locks and darker skin. And so when I went to Japan, because I was in this expat area with these international kids, it wasn't as alienated. So kids really want to be my friend, and I was able to have friends, and it was just, I have a lot of good memories, you know. So I I always feel good thinking about it. It was just a really fun time for me. Not that there were still issues, but I enjoyed it a lot, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Did you feel really supported when there were times where you felt like some kind of a cultural clash? Or would you say you kind of like grew into that culture because you'd spent so much of your formative years there?
Oh, definitely. I mean, major part of the schooling was learning Japanese, learning the customs. Um, and I, because I didn't get to stay so long, I didn't get to learn Japanese fully, but I would have been on my way. And so, yeah, I was pretty immersed. And I also did like a festivals, like, so I would participate in the festivals in the area. We lived in around Roppongi Hills, so that was like the big expat area. And so with school trips and in that area, there was always some kind of cultural festival happening or some kind of exhibit, like art galleries, um what do you call it, like art installations, things like that. So I got to participate in things like there was an African drumming circle, and it was really cool because they came up to me because I was like the only little Black girl in the crowd, and we hit the drums, and so it was really cool doing that. And I used to do like taiko drumming at Nishimashi, so I got to do like performances on stage with my peers, and I participated in festivals where there was one where it was the Japanese princess, and I had to present a gift, so I was chosen for that. And so it's just things like that. It was really fun to be able to immerse myself, and again, because my family practices Japanese Buddhism, so when we went there as well, we were got to see where our practice
Right,
came from.
right.
So just really amazing.
What about the culture now, like looking into everything that you know now? What about the culture in Japan did you love the most or feel most attached to?
The thing that I attached myself to the most was the mythology. When I came back to America, I was obsessed with Japanese mythology, especially the mythology around kitsune or foxes. Not so much now. I feel like I don't remember as many things that I did like when I was younger, but I was very into it. I would get books and read so many articles and do like character designs and stuff. So I was very into learning about Shintoism, and I also super into anime and
Oh, I
manga
love that. Yeah.
and Pokemon. So when I learned before we went that Pokemon came from Japan, I was really hyped up. I was like, oh my God, I finally get to go to the Pokemon Center and see where like Ash Ketchum came from.
Right.
And so I was really into that. And we went to the Pokemon centers a lot. And I had like a whole collection of things. I still have like little notebooks and toys and stuff
That's
from
so cool.
centers. Yeah. And also the gaming culture, being able to go into these little tiny shops and get like a Game Boy or get kind of some kind of specialty thing
Yeah.
that was exclusive. We also had, because of living in Japan, we got things a little earlier than Americans. So I had like a DS earlier, like
Oh, yeah.
certain games that were exclusive. So it's really just really cool as a nerd
Yeah. Yeah.
experience. Be like one step ahead,
Yeah.
you know.
I love that. Yeah, I can imagine. And like in the US, it would be like pockets of that. But in Japan, it's almost like every other person is somewhat immersed into that kind of lifestyle as well, like into gaming or into anime and all of that. So that's so cool.
Oh yeah, it was definitely, it was easy to find the spaces, and where here it's like you have to go to GameStop, and they they're not great.
Yeah.
Have a lot of issues, and they don't always have the best stuff, and sometimes you get stuff that's like fake selling it. So being able to go into a Japanese store and see like all the genuine stuff back from the 80s and 90s and be able to grab those things is
that's
be able to
amazing.
access that is awesome. So I miss that a lot.
Would you say that there's still a part of your self-identity that you would kind of attest to Japan? Would you still say there's a part of you that's kind of Japanese?
I feel like there's a part of me, especially because of my Buddhist practice, that there's, you know, certain beliefs, philosophies are integrated into my life. As I grew older, it started fading a bit more, especially the Japanese I knew, and certain memories, but I remember a lot of things. So like I know I remember things that my parents don't. So
Right.
I always have to remind them. But yeah, I would say it heavily influenced my art. It's like you can see back here. I know you're
Yeah.
probably not going to be able to see like what's behind me when this comes up, but I just have like little kitsune mask I made and like a painting from a game I played
That's so cool.
called Okami, which is like really um focused on based on Shintoism and
Mm,
Japanese mythology. So it's like totally integrated into our house. Like I behind my computer is my taiko drum.
that's
So
so cool.
yeah, it's always going to be a part of me, but definitely it's like some of it has faded.
Yeah.
But yeah,
How long were you in Japan for?
like 2.5 years about.
Okay. So, a small portion of your life, but, again, I guess because it's so vastly different from, what you had before and what you've had after, it's going to have some kind of a level of impact. What would you say is like maybe the hardest part of your time in Japan?
um I would say the major thing was, even though it was an international setting, I always ran into issues with the American kids. So the American kids would bully me, but I was able to kind of avoid them a bit and be with the kids that accepted me. There was only like two I knew, maybe three, uh, that I had some issues with, and it was usually like, it was clearly, when I look back now, it was like microaggressions. It was about my race. Um, so they would just be really rude to me out of nowhere. And I was always a shy kid. So it'd be like, what am I doing? I'm just here existing. And uh, my parents had difficulty as well because they weren't accepted by the Americans. So I think we were, I can't remember, but I think we were the only Black family from America. And with the company that brought us there. So that was a major issue. So we didn't really interact with
Mm,
Americans. It was always like Africans, Indians, British people, Swedish people. Um, I had a friend from Hong Kong actually, and some mixed kids as well. So
right.
we found our way, but that was very frustrating that from America and even in this space, it was just very frustrating that um, we were thinking, well, we would have a community, but we didn't, and it was still because of intolerance and racism. And um, but I'm glad that at least we were able to find our own space,
Mm,
be blatantly isolated and kind of kicked out of those spaces
right.
and act
And
like
like,
people weren't there. So
right. And like in Japan, there's still a minority of a population that, are Americans, but from there, you and your family moved back to the States. What was that like then, going back into the US, sort of knowing what you knew with that small community of Americans in Japan that, were not treating you. Um, yeah, well,
yeah, I so when I came back, I had extreme reverse culture shock. I believe that's what it's called. And
mm,
so because my schooling that was my first experience of school. So like all of my foundations were based in Japanese or international schooling, in private schooling. So then I came back and we had a nice apartment in Japan. And then when we came back to, it was Canton, Connecticut, which we hadn't been there before. It was a suburb. And so those experiences I had with Americans in Japan, it just amplified. And we moved into, we were in a hotel and then we moved into a condo. And immediately I was hit with not understanding like anything about American culture. At the same time, my mom, when she was in school in Mount Holyoke, she was pretty isolated. So she was always in the international community and the West Indian community. And so she hadn't really experienced like the white American suburbs before. And then when she came out of school, she had me. And so she was a stay-at-home mom. And then we went to Japan. So when we finally came back, she was also experiencing this culture shock with me because she couldn't understand this American culture. So I had issues with like my understanding of currency. I couldn't understand American currency because I understood everything in yen.
Right.
I had issues with my language because my mom, since she has a Bajan accent, I was picking up on that. And so I wasn't spelling things correctly. And so I had a hard time with that in school. Teachers were bullying me because of my race, or like always kind of singling me out. And I was a good student. I had good grades and stuff, but they would just always give me a hard time and challenge me and kind of act like I wasn't smart. And so it was fighting for that. And I didn't have that in Japan either. So, and then obviously with all of that happening, I was also being called slurs, or like kids around me would treat me like, act like I didn't exist. They would say the N-word on the bus and just do things that were clearly attacks on me because I was usually the only Black girl in the classroom or a Black kid. Down to the point where they were telling me I would go to hell because I didn't believe in God because I'm a Buddhist. So it was all that when I was like 6 years old. So it's just constant attacks. And I was a tomboy as well. So I was seen as kind of a weirdo. And a nerd, and nerds are accepted now, but back then it was like you're weird and we don't like you and we don't want to talk to you and we're just gonna kind of isolate you.
Right.
So it was a lot happening all at once.
Yeah, oh my gosh. And for like a 6-year-old at that point, you know, you're trying to figure out what's going on with this whole new culture, new school, new environment, new basically everything. And then on top of that, trying to figure out whether the people are speaking down at you or are they, where is it coming from as well? Is it because of the color of my skin, or is it because of the way that I am, my personality, and, internalizing all of that, processing all of it? I can't imagine how difficult that must be. Did you have anyone that you could relate to or feel supported by inside or even outside of school within your neighborhood?
In my neighborhood, I was being bullied too. So, and we had neighbors that would make fun of us or try to demean us. So, there was times where I feel like people would undermine our experience in Japan as well. So there was things like that happening. And then I mean, my mom could just stay at home mom. Like she was my support system. And I feel like at school eventually I had maybe 3 friends from what I can remember that I could talk to. And there was some support there, but there was a point where there was a Black kid that came, 2 Black kids that eventually joined, and one was very nice to me, but kind of started harassing me because they had like a crush on me. And then there was another kid who was bussed in from the inner city, and there was like this dynamic of, because I was from the suburbs, that I wasn't Black enough. So she just
Oh.
started attacking me and spitting on me. And she would use like the white kids that were bullying me and use them against me and would just make fun of me constantly. So I was just like being attacked by her all the time. And it was really
Mm.
bad. So I was looking at her as be like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And I really wanted to talk to her and be her friend. And she immediately was hostile. So it was very it was sad. Like I wanted to meet other people who were African American, and
Mm.
um it was just because I was always the shy kid and the quiet kid, and because I had this Japanese influence, and maybe I was well picking up on my mom's accent, that was just people were just like, no, we don't want to talk to you.
Right.
So yeah.
I guess it's one of those things when you're in an environment where it's just so homogenous. There is one of two ways. You'll often, I mean, what could happen, right? You might have that odd one or two person in that group that might be intrigued, curious, and would want to actually know more and genuinely open to it. But more often than not, you probably have, this group culture sort of thinking, or what they call group thinking, right? Where, they feed off of each other. They create this sort of like there is a sense of like community, and the people that don't fit in or don't belong are just ostracized. And when you do have that homogeneity, that's what tends to like be 10 times worse than when there is so much diversity around you. There's always going to be someone you can find to connect, right? So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that that was a major problem, and I think that was the difference again with Japan and coming to this suburb, was that having that diversity. Yeah, it was able to find people. And then when we came back to America, we lost contact because it was just a different lifestyle.
Right.
And we went back kind of to like a regular life, and a lot of the people we met, because they were expats, they were like had families that were CEOs, or they were like executives or something. So then when we came back, it was like that disconnect. And so when we came into this homogeneous kind of environment, it was like people, I couldn't, it was, I think it was second grade I started finding friends, but it was the first grade that was very bad. And even second grade was still bad, but at least I found like three people I could have play
Mm.
dates with.
Right.
Yeah.
um how long would you say like this bullying sort of went on for you
Oh,
overall?
geez. I mean, so again, I came back in for first grade, and it lasted all the way until seventh grade. Um,
Gosh, that's a
so
long
it was from 6 years old to 13, 14.
time.
It never stopped. It kept getting worse. And a large part of it too is because I was dealing with early puberty. So I was taller than anyone, than a lot of
Mm.
kids. Um, and so I was just developing faster, and I was only like 7. We couldn't figure out why this was happening. So that also made me stick out. Because I
Right.
was starting to look like a tween at like 7 or 8. And that's
Right.
kind of, that was definitely gonna cause bullying. Um, so I wore a lot of baggy clothes and stuff, and that made me lean in more into my tomboy um, dressing style and how I interacted with people. So when we moved to New Hampshire because the racism that my dad was experiencing was so bad. Um, his One of the things that when he complained about what he was experiencing, uh, he basically was pushed out and told that, oh, it's diversity of thought, not diversity of people. And that made it so then they didn't care to bring in other people of color into the space and he was working in. So ultimately we had to leave that, and we eventually got an opportunity to move to New Hampshire, not knowing that it was 2% Black, and that the experiences that I had compared to Connecticut are much worse here. So when we moved, I was going to doctors, and to figure out what was happening. I was having nosebleeds and all kinds of like high blood pressure only at 7, 8 years old. And so that was the bullying kept exacerbating those health issues. And yeah, it just kept getting worse. And the teachers and the students were just wouldn't, again, acted like I didn't exist, or they would just blatantly do things. So it was a mess.
My gosh. That's so difficult. Like I can't
Mm-hmm.
even like imagine what that must have been like for you. Do you have any like recollections of any one particular moment that stood out to you?
Oh my gosh, there's multiple. I think one of them was I had uh moved in the middle of the school year, and so I just joined into the classroom, and there was a girl who was another Black girl. She was biracial, and again, I wanted to be her friend. And I was like, oh, okay, this is it's cool seeing another person who maybe looks kind of like me. And um her her dynamic was that she was lighter skinned. She had a white parent, and so she was, I think, to cope, she was dealing, again, linked up with a lot of the white kids to survive. And she was really obnoxious and was constantly making fun of me, um, calling me a boy because of my being a tomboy, and just doing the same thing that the other girl did. And when my mom complained my mom was always standing up for me. And so she called the teacher and said, hey, stop pairing my child with this kid. She's bullying her. She's being absolutely horrible. This is what's going on. And the teacher didn't care and kept pairing me with her. And we realized what it was is that because we were only two Black students, and this was like a 60, 70-year-old teacher, she was just like, white teacher, she was like, we're just going to put you together because you're both Black, basically. But instead, she just wouldn't listen. So we were complaining about it. So it was really annoying having to deal with that, because that was where the kind of dynamics I would deal with. Like, they would just sometimes, obviously we weren't compatible, and this would happen time and again where I wouldn't be compatible with someone, but I would just be paired with them just because we were the same race.
Right.
And they would pick on me. So that was one of my first experiences moving here. And also just because of the art I was doing, kids were stealing my art concepts and trying to compete with me and like tell me things like, I knew someone who was a friend who would say, like, she wanted to have she wanted to have my hair, she wanted to have everything I had. There was a kid who was stealing my toys and breaking them and stuff. So it was a lot of dynamics that we were dealing with that I think one of the issues was we learned something called house envy, because we were able to move into a brand new house in a brand new neighborhood. And so there was this issue of like, people didn't think we deserved that, because we came from like living in these small apartments. So we finally were able to get a nice house and have all these trinkets and stuff from Japan, and all this decor and all these cool things, like gaming and stuff. And so the kids would get jealous of that and just would come in and just destroy it. Like,
into your house.
yeah, break technology, broke our toilet, threatened to break, like, we had a Barack Obama plate because he just got elected. So we were really, celebrating that, and some kids threatened to just take the plate and break it. It was like a
Wow.
really special thing that we purchased. And so there was things like that happening constantly. And some people just wouldn't want us to visit their homes because I guess they lived in older houses. So then when they would come here, that would kind of, again, exacerbate the issue. So yeah, it was again a lot of dynamics happening, and it was really hard to have friends because of that.
Yeah.
People just didn't think we deserved what we had, solely because of our race. And we were the only Black family still here. the only Black family in our neighborhood 15 years later.
Wow.
So a lot of people have never seen a Black person here.
Until today.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I feel like now more Black people are coming here, but yeah, a lot of kids have never seen a Black person, especially when we moved here in 2008. So
Right.
that added that dynamic.
Right. I genuinely do wonder like what that must be like now if there's more openness, knowing like it was, there, and you've got, so many, even Black celebrities and not so, even if they don't necessarily see it within their own circle, knowing that it's large and wide a part of the community there, and a lot of people to look up to, role models to look up to that do come from there, like whether that would be much different, or whether that they would even have like, you know conversations about racism or lessons or classes to like teach students to be more, inclusive in their language and in their behaviors. It's be really interesting to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a major thing that happened was when Obama came into office, and we always would watch like the what do you call them, like the anytime the president had like a speech. So there would be like a speech right before right at the beginning of the school year, and so we would watch those. And then when Obama came in, suddenly parents complained and said, we can't have Obama speaking at the school, like speaking, like they can't play that on the TVs. And so they obliged and they're like, okay, yeah, we're not going to do it. And so my parents made me stay home and watch it because it was very blatant. And there was a lot of issues where I would meet kids and they wouldn't watch anything with Black people in it. So like I finally met a kid at one point who was from Alabama, and we became friends. And she was from the deep South, and she was African American, and we connected, and we started talking to each other about our experiences. And I remember one of my friends, she was there while we were talking, and we were talking about watching like BET or in Black entertainment. And my white friend was like, what are you guys talking about? And we realized like, wait, no one here watches this.
Right.
And so they literally weren't participating in or watching things with Black people, and it may be sports, but I don't know, that was the representation that they saw, just people playing football and basketball. And that was also something that was pushed on me a lot. It's like, oh, you should play basketball, you should play sports. And I realized that's probably where it was coming from.
Right.
So yeah, there was just a lack. And it was to the point where this girl and I were talking about, wow, we don't see Black people in ads. We don't see ourselves. And how sad that was. And we were only like 9 or 10 at that point, but no one else understood that conversation. So and now years later, like there was already that issue of addressing race and Black history in schools and having it very censored, but now it's even worse, where they're trying to pass laws saying, no, we can't talk about any of this at all. So that's something that's being fought. And so the censorship is getting worse and worse of you can talk about, how to teach about it. So that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, that's why I would experience those things, because it's just people didn't know what Black people were like. And so they had an idea, and then that affected how it was treated.
That's so crazy to me, but at the same time, like, can't help but have like a little bit of like empathy, more so towards the individuals, mostly because they don't know otherwise. Not empathy towards them for their lack of for the bullying and the negative prejudices and behaviors, but more just their lack of understanding as to what it means, right? Because the system doesn't provide them with enough input to be able to normalize it for them. And so, I would still hope that they would have this, positive curiosity to want to know. But I suppose, in a sense, if they're constantly either not exposed to it, it's being censored, or even there's like negative narrations around it. that it just forms their whole worldly views towards it. It's very much like, I can hear so much of like a system wide problem here.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about that, I wanted to ask, when, for example, people were coming into your apartment and breaking things, naturally your personal safety is at jeopardy in this point. Did you or your family members reach out to the police, and what was that like?
No, we reached out to their families, and a lot of times they just didn't want to compensate us. Um, and we were like, okay, we're just not going to have these people come over anymore
Hmm.
because they're not taking responsibility. We never went to the police about it. But I remember like with the toilet, we weren't able to get it changed to a new one until last year. But it was always had issues after what that
Hmm.
person in like 2009.
Right.
So it was um yeah, I don't know. I feel like we started kind of isolating ourselves more and more
Right.
because we're just constantly being disrespected. And um like what you were talking about the lack of curiosity, that was definitely an issue too, because um there were a few kids that would try to get to know me, but there was always that limit. Especially again, we weren't going to church, so a lot of the community was finding community through the church, and so we weren't doing that. So like we would tell people we were Buddhists and be like, want to convert us, or they would like, not care
Mm.
and be like, oh, you should go to church with us. So that was another issue that was happening, where people just didn't care, didn't respect our practice. And at the same time, there was a lack of curiosity of learning about that, and also a lack of curiosity around um, our experience in Japan sometimes, where kids would be like, I would never want to leave New Hampshire. I want to stay here for the rest of
Mm.
my life. And I would meet a lot of kids like that.
Right.
Um, didn't even want to go to another state. They just wanted to stay here. So it was just they wanted to stay in this very isolated bubble. And again, um, New Hampshire is less than 2% Black. And I recently learned it's like 0.5% of people here are Black women. So
Mm.
from there was a Facebook group for Black women in New Hampshire to find support for to support each other. So there's like 7,000, I think,
Mm.
Black women here. So it's a very small amount. So that lack of curiosity is there because they just don't see us, and they don't go into those communities where we would be, even though those
Mm.
communities are small. Um, and so when a family like ours moves into a white suburb, they're like, you don't belong here. Um, and we've been challenged because of that, asked if we are supposed to be here, things like that. So
Right.
I'm not surprised. If you don't see it and you have parents saying that it's not important, or teaching them that it's okay to say slurs and stuff, then they're not going to care.
Right. No accountability. And
There's
that's the
no
thing as well. Like for you, I can imagine like feeling like everywhere that's supposed to be your safe space, your teachers, leaders in the school, the policemen, barring your parents, which is amazing that you have had supportive parents, but barring them, everyone else that you're very much closely connected with and seeing on a day-to-day basis, or that you're taught are there to provide safety to you, didn't didn't live up to that. And so I can imagine that still feeling really isolating, or just you know wanting, craving to have someone your age necessarily that could really really like sit with you through it, the emotional roller coaster, and not have to feel like that pressure from again the rest of the population of people, right, or students around. Yeah.
mm-hmm. Exactly. I think uh one of the memories I had was uh there was a we had a program called Reading Buddies. I don't know how many places have this, but I think it's still a thing. And so we would just the older kids would go and read to the younger kids. So I would go and what was it? I was in third or fourth grade, and I would be to the first and second graders. I had a partner that
Mm.
was uh little white girl, and I guess she never seen a Black girl in her life, and she would just act like I didn't exist, and I would read the books to her, and she would be whispering to her friends and snickering at me, and always just saying like really snide and passive aggressive comments. And then someone told me, I think there was another girl in the group, and she was very quiet and nice, and she told me that she was calling me a monster. And so I went to my mom, and I went to the teacher, and I said, this is unacceptable. And then I got a letter. The teacher made the kid write a letter apologizing to me, and she just listed all the things she was calling me. And I can't remember the rest, but she was calling me a monster because of my hair. And again, I was maybe 11 at this point, 10 or 11, and I was like, what? This is, and it made sense because that's how people were perceiving me, just because of how I look. And I got switched to the other girl who was telling me this was happening, and she was nice, and I think maybe she was being bullied too because she was always very quiet. But that experience, I feel like the teacher didn't do enough. That kid should have been punished more, because the fact that they were calling me all these things that were racially charged, and this kid's still in the classroom not getting punished. I'm just switched to another kid. So that's what was happening. I would report these things and be told, oh, racism doesn't exist. And I'm like, what? I'm being called the N-word. I'm being told things like my history doesn't matter, like things like that, being called a monster. And you're telling me that it doesn't exist here? What are you talking about? So there was no help from the counselors, the teachers. Even a few teachers that would recognize, yeah, there was a problem, they wouldn't go take that extra step. A lot of times to help. So it was really just my mom and I just fighting all the time.
Can you tell me how that sort of manifested for you physically? I know you mentioned earlier high blood pressure, nosebleeds. Can you tell me a little bit more about how else did that manifest for you?
Wow. So wow. I'm trying to figure out how do I start? Because obviously the bullying kept happening into 7th grade. And I the whole time I was using my art to cope. And in elementary school, I had like a art show because of my teacher realized that art was helping me heal. And so he helped set up the first art show at the school, and that helped kids start talking to me. Like they would talk to me a little bit, and they really loved my art. So I kept using that to cope. And heal from what was happening. A lot of that was influenced my experience in Japan, because I was like, my happy memories were there. So that's what I used. So that's where a lot of mythology and the Shintoism and my Buddhist practice is being heavily influencing what I was creating. And by the time I got to middle school, so 7th grade, I was getting sicker and sicker. And I determined once I went to middle school, like, I'm going to stand up for myself. But sometimes I just wouldn't stand up for myself, but I was so scared and no one had my back. And so I decided in that moment, like, no, this is a whole new group of kids, and some of them I know, but I don't care. I'm going to start standing up for myself. And so I started calling people out left and right, reporting things. Even if something wasn't done, I would push it. And my mom had my back in that. But the health issues kept getting worse, and I was still getting nosebleeds. I still had high blood pressure. The stuff around puberty was getting a little easier because more kids were going through puberty, but it was still like awkward. And obviously with the trauma around the bullying got so bad that I created this anti-bullying project called Do You Know Who I Am? And it was supposed to be implemented into the school system. I was presenting it to a new school that was built right next to our middle school and things like that. And it was a presentation where I told my story, and the goal was to get other kids to tell their story, especially those who were being bullied, and just say what their aspirations were, what their goals in life were, and talk about their family, their background, be like, hey, I'm a human too. And you know, have some curiosity about other people, right? And that was something that was really accepted. But then I kept, what I did is I went to the principal and I went to the teachers and I read them this essay detailing what was happening to me and what I was witnessing, because I started seeing, before I knew what it was, I started seeing ableism, blatant sexism, and on top of the racism issues. And so there was a good amount of teachers that accepted that and were like, wow, we didn't know this was happening, or like they knew this was happening but they didn't know how to deal with it, because a lot of times teachers would hide what was happening and refuse to report it, especially if slurs and stuff were being used. And so when I got to this certain group of teachers, there were 8th grade teachers, and I think some of the teachers were older, and a lot of them, after my presentation, instead of interacting with me like the others, they walked out and or just looked very like angry. And so it was totally different dynamic from all the other stuff I did, including presenting it at that new school. And next thing I know, I hear from the principal saying, we're done with this project. And everything was shut down. So doing like this tour and getting it implemented into the curriculum, just done. And we knew it was because we were touching what they didn't want to touch.
Right.
Especially because the older kids were the ones causing the most trouble. It was the 8th graders that were doing a lot of the bullying. And so I'm not surprised that those teachers acted that way, because they were trying to cover it up. And so they were being called out by a little kid.
Yeah.
And so that's where the panic attacks started happening. I think I was always having panic attacks. I've always had symptoms of having anxiety disorder since I was a little kid. And it would explain my shyness, but it got worse to the point where I couldn't even walk into the school without freaking out, having a panic attack. And so the vice principal, she was actually my one support that I had. And so she came to me and said, anytime something happens to you, you come to me directly and I'll take care of it. And so she started supporting me, and my mom was able to talk to her as well. But it got to the point where the bullying got so bad because of me calling these things out that teachers and students started acting like I didn't exist. So it was just totally treated like I was invisible. And it was the worst of it. I've always experienced it, but it was the worst of it. And because of that, panic attacks kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I decided to leave school a week early. And so what I did was the principal worked with me to do my final test for the year in the library. And I just finished everything in there because I could not go into the classroom without panicking. And I got all that done, and I was like, I'm gonna be homeschooled. We looked for different schools, but we decided, you know what, we're just gonna be homeschool online, because I kept running into that same dynamic, whether it was a private school, charter school, whatever. So I just went to public school, this online charter school called PTSD, and my parents came into the middle school and forced the principal to apologize for what he did. And then we went to the superintendent's office and reported what was happening, and they paid us so then I can get a computer. And so we were talking about taking legal action, because I was getting really sicker and sicker and sicker, and we decided, you know what, it would be too much to actually go through this legally, because if we talk about race in this community and it just comes the whole thing where we go after the school, our whole family is going to be attacked.
Right.
Because again, we're the only Black family in this area. So it was like, okay, we just have to focus on my health. And I found this naturopath who is also a medical doctor, Dr. Amanda, and she basically saved my life, and she advocated for me and called out the school and said, you need to pay this family and make sure that she can get homeschooled and have her computer. And then she got me all my doctors. I got my endocrinologist. I got a new general practitioner, and I learned that I was at risk of developing Addison's disease. So that from 14 to now, I get tested once a year to see if I develop this autoimmune disease. I had to get a high blood pressure medication. But I couldn't find a therapist that would care about racial trauma. And so I was continuing until like age 21, 22, getting the wrong diagnosis for what I was experiencing and being gaslit the whole time. saying like, oh, that isn't about race. So it's a long answer, but it's like a lot of foundation, I wanted to set, because it was a lot of things that led to these health issues, and it was multiple happening all at once.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of it is like sort of centered around the racism, but and it's manifested into a level of stress that has, really turned into something very physical. From what I know, a lot of autoimmune diseases also come, or, they can be genetic and they can be a variety of things, but a lot of it can also stem from like a level of extreme stress, that causes hormonal imbalances. And,
Yes.
your body is just not able to create, like your glands are not able to create enough to like, fight those, things. So, it sort of develops over time too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened with the testing I was doing with um, my naturopath. She was like, wait, you're almost flatline. Like my cortisol was barely, it was like almost non-existent.
Mm.
And so she said it's because of the compounding stress. And
Right.
so having all that happen at 13, getting on high blood pressure medication, being told, hey, you might have this autoimmune disease. It was to the point that I could barely exercise without feeling like I was going to pass out. Like my
Mm.
vision would go in and out. I had to stop riding. I haven't ridden a bike in years because there was this trauma of like I kept almost fainting and dealing with really bad motion sickness.
Right.
And so I've had to be very cautious with physical activity. Um, and so again, because of the bullying as well, became more isolated, and I having to be homeschooled online. I couldn't make friends in the community because the people I knew in the community were bullying me. The kids I knew on the online program were victims of bullying or had disabilities, and so they didn't want to really interact with people.
Mm.
Um, Thankfully, I had a scholarship at this local art school called Kimball Jenkins. It's a private art school. I got at age 11, so I was taking adult classes there, but I was always meeting kids, those who were like students who were like in their 70s and 80s. And so they're older white ladies. So they were nice, but like I would still deal with some issues. And so
Mm.
I was I was like, if I had friends, like my friends were like 80-year-olds, like
Yeah.
so it was like very strange having to deal with that dynamic. And yeah, I it was just a lot happening where I just kept going inward and inward and inward. And I didn't again, it was my mom really that advocated for me, and she made sure I found all these doctors and stuff. And um I didn't really have much support from my family or extended family either, because of this dynamic in the Black community of like cover up, mental illness.
Mm.
We don't talk
Right.
about mental illness. We don't talk about disability. Um, there's a massive chunk of the Black community that just doesn't believe in therapy, and I understand that because of historically of you know dynamics we've had with getting medical care and healthcare, but it's very frustrating. So a lot of times it was just me and my mom standing alone with my doctors, um, who were there to support. But yeah, it was a lot to handle only as like a tween. Like no one
Yeah,
should have to do that.
exactly. Because I mean, like you're already going through like the changes of like adolescence, and then on top of that, it's all of this as well, like trying to manage all of that and not even have therapy for that. So it's sort of like you're being treated on the medical front, which is really important to have. Like, again, the hormone tests, all of those kind of things. But the root cause of it was still existent. It still was there. And, it's like at what point can I medicate, for my high blood pressure and all of these things if at the end of the day I'm still coming back to the same feeling that I have about like the stress, the anxiety over what's caused it, right? The bullying, the racism, and the lack of support that never changed. So
Yeah.
you can treat it, you can manage the physical things temporarily, but ultimately it sort of like keeps coming back. So I mean, have you found a method to like manage your panic attacks better, like differently, better?
Yeah. Um, Again, I've always used my art to help. And I would say like my Dr. Amanda, my naturopath, like she was the one that was like really addressing that, hey, this is because of racial trauma. We didn't know that it was called racial trauma, but she was like, this is because of racism. All these health issues is, racism and your lack of family support. And so how I managed it was that she would give me remedies. Eventually I got on CBD oil, but that wasn't until I turned 18 because I couldn't take it any earlier. And that really started helping. I'm still using it. It helps a lot. And again, because of the lack of being able to find a therapist that would understand me and having to switch and stuff, a couple of times I kept using my art as art therapy before I really knew what art therapy was. So I would just express my experiences. And so the influence from like comics and manga and stuff, I would create comics telling about my experiences. An art series. So like one of them was Emo Bunny, which is the character I used to it's a anthro bunny girl who has at the time when I created her, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, but now I've been told I have panic disorder. So I was using that character to tell that experience and how she had this emotional support cat that supported helped her when she had panic attacks. And so her anxiety was, I would draw her anxiety as this monster, this black kind of monster with tendrils and multiple eyes, and it would just kind of loom over her and start like trying to consume her. And so that was my way of interpreting what I was going through. And I had another series called Hidden Demons of Anxiety, which is based off of my Buddhist practice and my experience in Japan, and of using Japanese Noa masks, which are theater masks, and Oni masks to interpret what it was like dealing with anxiety and how it can destroy you, how it destroys you mentally. So I was using, when no one would listen to me, I would just be like, okay, I'm just gonna go use my pen. I feel like using art helped me eventually find a therapist, because then I could like say like, this is what I'm dealing with, this is how I've illustrated it. And so when it was hard to describe it with words, I would just show them the art. And so, but yeah, I took me until 21 or 22 to find a therapist, and she's an art therapist, I think called somatic therapy. And so it's like mind, body, and soul, so it addresses everything. And she's phenomenal. But yeah, from 14 to 21.
What exactly does art therapy like entail? Like, what do you do in your sessions? Do you talk to them, or do you like communicate through art?
What I've done is actually I do a lot of it myself. So when I go into therapy, it's mostly like a talk therapy and stuff that I do, and breathing and learning techniques to cope. But with the art therapy, what I do, I just kind of sit there and like, okay, I have this idea in my head of like, this is what I'm feeling right now, or this is a narrative I want to create, and I just draw it out, and it comes out how, I focus on my feelings around it, and so I just kind of let it flow. And I think that's how I created like the anxiety monster. I was like, okay, this is what it feels like to me when I have this panic attack, and I can feel it. I can feel that it's happening. So it's being able to really connect to yourself. And it feels like it helps a lot with communication and how to communicate with yourself. So like over time, like along with CBD, like it's helped me be like, oh, I can recognize that this is a sign I'm panicking. This is a sign I need to take a break, that I need to step back, that I'm in a situation that's triggering, or that this is a person that is unsafe to be around for my mental health. So it's helped me really, like that mind, body, soul thing that I'm saying, like it helped me make that connection with myself. Yeah.
That's so great. Do you feel like you're in a like much better place? I mean, do you feel like you still have like ways to go to get there?
Oh yeah. I feel like I'm way better in the sense that because of my art and stuff, like I can talk to people. Um, I couldn't jump on a Zoom call like this before. I didn't like hearing my own voice. I didn't like taking any photos of myself. Um, I just didn't like seeing myself because there was so much internalized
Right.
like anti-blackness. I mean, being called monster and stuff from such a young age.
Mm.
Um, for just existing. Um, that really impacted how I viewed myself. And so being in um having to do a lot of self-advocacy
Right.
and a lot of reassurance from my doctors and especially Dr. Amanda. I mean, she's a family friend, and my mom helped me start really addressing those insecurities. And so now I could do things like this. I could talk on the phone if I have to. I still struggle with that. I still get a little bit panicked. Um, but I mean, my art has really propelled me to be in the space where I can do like art coordinating and art directing and organize like a group of people, like, you know, pull together a team and,
Mm.
you know, create these art shows because I continued doing that.
Right.
It became homeschooled. Um, I took that I know who I am project and I turned it into something called I'm proud of who I am, and that toured the different
Wow.
libraries in the community,
Yeah.
telling a bit of my story, not really addressing the race issue because of the dynamic here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt like it would be too dangerous too. So like my mom and I, she helped pull that together for me with a student from Kimball Jenkins, and that started helping me like address
Mm.
um, uh, some of those anxiety issues I was dealing with in the community, and it's still a problem. Like I still don't feel like I can come into this community and be like totally accepted or like
Mm.
cared for, or you know, and so um I feel like the thing I struggle with still is the agoraphobia. Because I learned I have agoraphobia a couple years, like, yeah, a couple years ago, like I was 19, and I realized that it was because of my experience with the community that I just didn't like going out.
Is that
Um,
what agoraphobia is, like a fear of going out?
yeah, it's the fear of like having you get panic attacks from being outside by yourself or being in situations that trigger um, a trauma.
Mm.
Um, so if I'm with someone that I know is like safe, then I can go out places. But if I'm by myself, I get really panicked and
Mm.
freaked out. And so, and it's not for me, it's not external. You wouldn't be able to tell, but I just freeze.
Right.
I can't move, I can't function. And so obviously like the pandemic made that more difficult. Um, but I've found ways to address it, and but at the same time, because of my family being immunocompromised, because of my other health issues going on, I can't go out too much anyway.
Mm.
So I really focus on like addressing my anxiety issues and social anxiety issues with the virtual work that I do and the artwork that I do. Like if
Right.
I can't address that right now, then at least I can address this issue I have with talking to others and being able
Right.
to and that again, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now like a couple
Yeah.
years. So
Yeah.
I just do what I can.
And I suppose, I mean, again, I can't speak for someone with agoraphobia on this because I don't personally experience this, but do you think that like being able to be there, like be connected with the world virtually, would maybe eventually help you to kind of like step out into the physical space, or do you think they are like quite mutually exclusive?
I think so. That's kind of been my goal. Um, Before the pandemic, I had like gallery opportunities for Emo Bunny, and I lost them because of what happened, obviously. So like that was my way to address it.
Mm.
So I was when I had to go do everything virtually, I just started pushing myself and challenging myself. And I was like, I'm gonna push through this panic attack. I'm gonna push through this trigger.
Mm.
And that was before I had the therapist. Because I dropped my last therapist like in 2018. So I was like doing all of this work with my mom, with Dr.
Mm.
Amanda. And so I kept challenging myself and with the goal in mind that I'm gonna address these insecurities, address this, bring up my confidence. So then eventually, if I'm able to go and do like an in-person thing around my art, that I would feel more comfortable. And so I'm in that space now of like, okay, I think I can do that now. And it's helped me so much. So yeah, I think building that confidence weirdly through talking through a screen and doing phone calls and video conferences and things like has given me that courage that like I feel like I can interact with people in a physical space. And it's really because of my art. My art has been so healing for me that I just use it as a tool to address these issues.
Right. So talking about like your art, you've talked about how it's been really healing for you and therapeutic for you. How has your artwork helped sort of like communities around you, through your gallery, the community building that you have made? Have you ever had anyone who's come back to you and said, like, this has helped me, or have you used it to sort of like connect people together or communities together a little bit?
Yeah, with the I'm proud of who I am shows, I did that from like 14 to 16, I think. So that was from 2014 to 2016, and we had like a little book that people could write notes in at the exhibits. And so it was kids and adults like writing these notes saying, wow, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm really inspired by your art. This makes me want to be an artist, or this gives me confidence to become an artist and tell my story. So I was getting things like that. And it was just amazing seeing those really heartfelt messages. And so that encouraged me, after I graduated virtual school, that I would continue doing that. And I because of what happened with the pandemic, when I lost those opportunities, I just went and started doing virtual art shows. So I worked with this group called Artivism Initiative in Massachusetts. I don't think they exist anymore now, but I developed a BLM show for them, and I coordinated, directed it, and I helped organize a physical event. I didn't get to go to it, but we did this physical event where I connected with this organization called Brain Arts org, which is a Boston nonprofit that helps marginalized artists in Boston. So I connected with them out of nowhere, and I was like, hey, do you know Black artists that can be vendors at this event? And they just connected so much of them. We helped set up tables and stuff so they could sell their art. And through the virtual show that we did, we went and had this, like, it was like 50 people came, and it was all of these Black artists telling their story, and artists who were non-Black, but they were advocating for Black civil rights, and they were using their art to raise awareness. And so it was a really healing space, and we were able to give people like funds. So we gave them prizes to support their work. And so that made me realize, like, wow, like doing this virtual stuff, like even if I can't be there in person, like when it came to the physical one, like it was really helping people. And so I continued with it, and that led to the project my mom and I do now with Art in Mind, another virtual show helping marginalized women, marginalized genders tell their stories.
That's really cool. I'm gonna put like some of your links onto our description as well, and maybe some of your artwork as well into our website for people to have a look at as well, and get some little inspiration. So this actually leads me to my last question to you for the night, which is, well, my night, your morning. But my last question to you, which is like, what sort of like advice would you give to anyone listening today that might be experiencing some form of bullying, be it related to racism or anything else? Because in the sense that maybe listeners might not quite be able to necessarily relate to the racist aspect of it, but bullying could be something that someone can really like connect with your story as well. So what advice would you give to, individuals experiencing this, or even parents that are supporting their child experiencing something like this? You can say this from, your mom and how she supported you through too.
Yeah. I'm gonna start off first with what my mom did. My mom just never gave up on me or standing up for me. Like, she didn't care what other people thought. To the point where she stomped into the school and just was yelling at them and calling them out for their crap. And so she never left my side. And when no one was listening to me, no one else was listening to me and my family, that I don't care, there's something wrong with my child. She's fading away, and I'm gonna get her back. I'm not gonna let anyone tell me there's nothing wrong with her and gaslight her. And so she kept fighting. And if that meant having to switch doctors, having to go to new facilities, helping me get new teachers. If a teacher was doing microaggressions to me, she did that. She was always that support. And so I think it's really important as a parent to listen to your child, observe your child. And if you see that there's something wrong, even if they're not communicating it, sometimes it'd be so hard to communicate what was happening. I didn't want my mom to worry about what was happening to me, but she was really in tune with like just seeing like when like my energy levels shifted, or like when I wasn't really present or I was really depressed. And so she would find ways to make me comfortable and be like, if you're not able to tell me how you feel right now, I'm just going to sit here and hug you and support you. And you eventually, she would make me feel comfortable enough to be able to tell her what I needed. And so it's just being that pillar for your child, and having that unwavering support, even if you don't understand like what's going on at all.
Right.
So she was just really selfless, and I know she was going through a lot of stress as well because of what she was witnessing and how parents were treating her and how teachers were treating her. But she always tried to kind of find a way to manage that and still encourage me. And on the other side, as a kid, or as someone, to tell people who are experiencing bullying, is I feel like this is said a lot, but I've always told this to myself, to just never give up and to self-advocate. And so what I've done is that even when I felt down, and there were times where I was like, I don't want to exist anymore. And so I just despite that, I just kept going. And I was like, I think a lot of that was because of my experience in Japan, of like, I know there's something better. I know that there's people who care. I know that there's communities that I will find that are for me. But I just had this idea in my head that I'm going to find my people. I'm going to find people that care about these things and care about me. And so I fought for that. I just kept that in my head, of like this vision of like, I'm going to find my people. And that kept me going. And years later, I feel like I'm finding that now through my art. And it might be something different for other people, might not be art, but yeah, I just think that self-advocacy and finding someone you can trust, they'd be like, this is what's happening to me, and just never letting someone tell you no.
I love that.
There's help out there, there's support out there, and to believe in yourself that, you know what, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to let someone tell me I should stop. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's really great. And I think it's so nice that you were able to sort of like say that to anyone, even young listeners, experiencing this, or someone kind of like overcoming it, or, coming out of that, moving into the next phase of their lives, still living with some of the pain and the trauma from that. It's always going to be really useful to have that, piece of advice by their side, to be able to say like, life is so much larger than this. And, you just got to have that willpower and that, yeah, that trust in yourself that you can get through it. I think that's the biggest sort of like strongest characteristic an individual can, like, grow and learn in themselves. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for today. I really, really appreciate you getting vulnerable, and it can't be easy reliving some of these traumatic memories as well. But I really appreciate you sharing this, and I do think our listeners have a lot to take away from today's conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just felt safe sharing it, and I really appreciate you inviting my mom on last time.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Chris Trzynski, Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.